What would you do if you had just 1 minute to live? It's a question that lingers at the back of our minds, a fleeting thought that crosses our consciousness whenever we're faced with our own mortality. You might laugh it off, telling yourself you still have time, that death is something for later. But what if later isn't so far away? What if, just like that, your time runs out? I never expected it to happen to me. Not in a million years. I remember the day it all began, or should I say, ended. It was a routine surgery, nothing too complicated, just a few hours under anesthesia. I was supposed to wake up groggy, sore, but alive. But that's not how it went. I was on the operating table, the sterile smell of the hospital room overpowering my senses. The surgeons were talking in hushed tones as they worked, the beeping of the monitors a constant reminder of the life I still had, at least, that's what I thought. It felt like any other procedure. But then, I heard it. The sound of a flatline. It wasn't the noise of my heart beating out of rhythm. It was the sound of nothing. No heartbeat. No breath. And then silence. That's when everything changed. There was no dramatic moment where I fought for my life. There was no panic. Just a sudden, unnatural stillness. A heaviness in the air. And then, nothing. I didn't feel pain or fear. It was just, stillness. I can't explain how it felt to know that I was no longer alive. I wasn't aware of how long I had been in that state, but the realization was immediate. Something shifted within me, and I realized I wasn't in my body anymore. I could see the operating room from above. There I was, lying motionless on the table, the doctors scrambling around my lifeless form. It was as if I had become an observer of my own death, suspended above the scene. My eyes, or what was left of them, focused on the frantic activity below, on the faces of people who were trying desperately to bring me back, not knowing I was already gone. I floated higher, detached from the sense of gravity that held my body in place. There was no pain, no fear. I wasn't aware of what was happening to me. The room started to fade, and as it did, something pulled me in another direction, a force, an undeniable force. And then, a light. At first, it was just a faint glimmer, like the tiniest spark in the distance. But it grew brighter, larger, until it consumed everything around me. It wasn't harsh or blinding, but soft, warm, and inviting. And as I moved toward it, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. A peace that washed over me, quieting all the noise, all the worries, all the pain. It felt like home. I wasn't afraid anymore. It was as if I had been led here, to this place where everything made sense, where everything was calm. My mind, which had been full of the usual chaos of life, work, family, worries, was now clear. I felt weightless, free. I was no longer bound by the limits of my physical body. This light, it wasn't just something I saw with my eyes. It enveloped me, filled me with warmth and love. There was no sound, but I could feel it. The light wasn't just something I was looking at, it was something I was inside of, something I was becoming part of. It was as if everything that had ever mattered, every question I'd ever had, was suddenly answered. The heaviness of life was gone. I didn't know where this place was, but it didn't matter. There was no need to ask, no need to question. I felt safe. I felt whole. I felt like I had finally come home. In that space, I encountered something. Someone, maybe. It wasn't like a person, not in the way we think of people, but there was a presence, a knowing. It felt ancient, wise. There was no voice, no words, but there was understanding. I wasn't alone. And then, just as quickly as I had entered this peaceful space, I heard a voice. It was not a voice in the traditional sense, but a knowing, an understanding. It wasn't external, it was internal. It resonated within me, deep in my soul. You can stay, the voice seemed to say, or you can go back. The words weren't harsh. There was no sense of urgency. No sense of fear. Just a calm acceptance. The decision was mine. For a moment, I hesitated. The choice seemed impossible, surreal. How could I go back? To what? To a world I had just left behind. To a life filled with its usual frustrations and struggles. But even in that place of peace, I knew I had unfinished business. I knew there were people waiting for me, people who needed me. The thought of leaving them behind, even in the face of such peace, made me feel torn. I didn't want to let go of the peace I felt in that light, but I knew I wasn't ready to leave my loved ones behind. And so, I made the choice. I chose to return. But as soon as I made the decision, a wave of resistance hit me. I felt myself being pulled, not against my will, but with a force that was too strong to resist. In the next moment, I was no longer floating in that vast, comforting light. Instead, I felt the weight of my body again. The cold, hard operating table beneath me. The beeping of the heart monitor. The frantic voices of doctors and nurses. The sterile smell of the hospital room. I was back. And yet, everything felt different. As the world around me came into focus, I realized I wasn't the same. Something had changed. I wasn't sure how to explain it, but I could feel it deep within me. I wasn't the same person who had entered that operating room just hours ago. The world, too, felt different. Like I was seeing it through a new lens, one that was more aware. I wanted to scream, to tell everyone what I had seen, what I had felt. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. I tried to move, but my limbs felt foreign, disconnected. I was back in my body, but my soul was somewhere else. And no one around me would understand. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As I lay there on the operating table, still dazed, the world felt distant. It wasn't like waking up from a deep sleep, where the fog of confusion gradually clears. No, this felt different. I was disoriented, yes, but there was an underlying clarity, a sense that I wasn't in the place I once was. I could hear the muffled voices of the medical team, the quick, frantic instructions they were giving each other. "We've lost him. Get the paddles." I wanted to scream, to tell them that I was right here, that I was still conscious, but no words came. The words I wanted to say didn't match the reality of the situation. They didn't hear me. No one could hear me. That's when I noticed it. I wasn't in my body anymore. There was no sharp moment, no loud crack or thunderous crash. It was more like a gradual unfolding, like peeling back the layers of an onion, layer by layer, until I realized I was no longer tethered to the form I had known my entire life. I was floating. At first, it wasn't clear where I was going, but then I began to sense the upward pull. It was subtle, gentle, but undeniable. Slowly, I drifted higher, above my body, above the operating table. And when I looked down, I could see myself, my physical form, lying there, unmoving, as doctors worked desperately around me. I could still hear the beeping of the heart monitor, but I wasn't afraid. I wasn't panicking. It was as if I had become detached from all of it. I felt no connection to the body that had once been mine. It was like I was a spectator, watching from afar, not concerned with the outcome. A part of me was aware of the physical struggle going on, but another part, the larger part, simply didn't care. It's hard to explain, but the moment I began to float upward, I felt a sense of freedom I had never experienced before. It was like my consciousness had been released from the prison of flesh and bone. I wasn't tied down by my body's limitations anymore. I could see things in ways I never could before, everything was sharper, clearer, and there was a deep sense of peace that washed over me. There was no fear. There was no sense of urgency. Just a calm, peaceful knowing that this was meant to happen, that this was part of something much larger than myself. I had crossed some kind of boundary, a threshold between two realms. The world I had known was fading, and a new world, an unknown world, was unfolding before me. Then, I saw it. The light. It started as a small, distant glow, something so faint that at first I wasn't sure it was even real. But as I moved closer, it grew brighter, warmer, more inviting. I don't know how to describe it, except to say that it wasn't like any light I had ever seen before. It wasn't harsh or jarring. It wasn't like the artificial lights of the hospital room or the dim lights of a room at night. It was soft, gentle, all-encompassing. The light didn't blind me. It didn't make me squint or look away. Instead, it seemed to draw me in, like a familiar embrace, like something I had been waiting for my whole life without even realizing it. As I drifted closer to it, I felt no fear. I felt no hesitation. In fact, the closer I got, the more comfortable I became, as though I were returning to a place I had always belonged. I felt warmth, like a mother's hug after a long day, and peace, an all-encompassing peace that washed over me like a cool breeze on a hot summer day. I had never felt more at ease. I can't explain it exactly, but everything about the light felt right. It wasn't just something I saw, it was something I experienced with every part of my being. My soul, if you could call it that, felt drawn to it. It was as though the light was alive, pulsating with energy, pulling me into it, and I wanted nothing more than to go. I had no sense of time, no awareness of the world I had left behind. It was just me and the light, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. And then, as I moved closer still, something unexpected happened. I became aware of other presences around me. At first, they were just flickers, shadows in the distance. But as I focused, the shadows began to take shape. They weren't people, at least not in the way we understand people, but they were definitely there. They were like figures made of light. These beings, if that's what they were, didn't speak in words, but there was a sense of communication, of understanding. It wasn't a conversation as we think of it, but a shared knowing, a deep, silent exchange. It was in that moment that I understood, I wasn't just drifting aimlessly in some void. I was part of something far bigger, far more significant than I could comprehend. And then, I heard it. Not with my ears, but in my soul. "Are you ready to stay?" the voice seemed to ask, but there were no words, just a deep knowing, an invitation. "Or do you wish to return?" I couldn't say how I knew the voice, but it felt familiar. It felt warm. It wasn't a threatening question, but a simple one. It wasn't as if there was a choice I had to make immediately. There was no urgency. Just a question. I felt drawn to the light, drawn to these beings, drawn to the peace that radiated from them. But something inside me, a small, quiet part, made me hesitate. My mind, my human mind, still clung to the familiar world. My family. My friends. My unfinished business. Could I really just leave them behind? Could I let go of everything that had once mattered so much? The invitation to stay was so tempting. The peace was overwhelming. I could have simply surrendered, let go of everything I had ever known, and stayed in this place of light and warmth. But the pull to return to my life, to the people who needed me, was too strong. And so, with a feeling of deep reluctance, I made my choice. I chose to go back. But even as I made the decision, I felt a pull, a gentle tug, pulling me away from the light. It wasn't harsh, but it was undeniable. The light seemed to recede, and the comforting warmth started to fade. And in the blink of an eye, everything changed. I was falling. Back. Back into my body. Back into a world I no longer fully understood. I woke up gasping, my lungs burning as though they hadn't taken a breath in an eternity. My body, my real body, the one that had been lying motionless on the operating table, was suddenly alive again. My chest rose and fell with each frantic, desperate breath, as if trying to remind me that I was still here, still tethered to the physical world. But as I regained consciousness, it felt like I was waking up from a dream that was fading fast, and the deeper I tried to grasp it, the more elusive it became. For a moment, I didn't understand what had happened. It was as if the world around me had snapped back into focus too quickly, pulling me from one reality to another. I could hear voices now, sharp, concerned voices. Someone was shouting, someone was calling my name. Nurses were running around, frantically checking machines, looking at me with wide eyes, not believing what was happening. But none of it mattered. I could still feel it. I could still feel the light. My soul, my very being, still held on to that other realm, that peaceful space, that warm embrace. I could feel it tugging at me, but as I tried to focus, the world of the operating room, cold, sterile, and full of medical machines, invaded my senses. I was back, but I wasn't the same. The doctors continued to work, but their words felt distant now. Their attempts to stabilize me seemed mechanical, like the movements of people in a fog, distant and disconnected from the clarity I had felt just moments ago. I could hear the beep of the heart monitor, a rhythmic pulse that felt out of place. I felt the sharp sensation of pain as I regained full awareness of my body, the familiar discomfort of stitches pulling at my skin, the soreness from being strapped down for the surgery. But underneath it all, there was this strange, foreign awareness, a profound stillness that contrasted the chaos of the world around me. My mind buzzed with the remnants of the light I had left behind. It didn't feel like a memory. It felt like something I had lived, something that had happened to me and was still happening, even though I was back here. The doctors, seemingly unaware of the transformation I had undergone, continued their efforts. But I could feel it, deep in my gut, something had changed. I wasn't the same person who had entered that operating room. The world was no longer the same either. As I lay there, trying to make sense of what had happened, something inside me urged me to speak. I wanted to shout to them, tell them about the light, the warmth, the peace I had experienced. I wanted to scream that I had been somewhere, that I had been someone else, but no words came. I felt paralyzed, not physically, but mentally. The words were there, but they didn't seem to fit into this world. How could I explain what I had just gone through? How could I share an experience that was beyond human understanding, beyond anything that could be explained? I struggled to sit up, my body feeling like a heavy weight, like I was wearing someone else's skin. The doctors noticed me moving and quickly rushed to my side, their faces full of concern. "You're awake," one of them exclaimed. "How do you feel? Do you remember anything?" I could hear their words, but they felt so distant. My voice cracked, weak and unfamiliar. "I remember, but where do I start? How could I start? How could I possibly explain what I had just experienced, when I wasn't sure I even understood it myself?" My mind was a jumble of thoughts, fragments of light and warmth, of the other realm I had visited, of the invitation to stay, and then the pull to return. I wanted to tell them about the beings of light, about the sense of timelessness, about the overwhelming peace that had filled every fiber of my being. But I couldn't. Instead, I just looked up at them, feeling like an outsider in my own body, in my own life. The doctors didn't push me. They were used to patients waking up disoriented, sometimes confused or groggy. But as they checked my vitals and confirmed that I had somehow defied the odds and come back to life, I couldn't shake the feeling that they didn't understand. They didn't know what I had seen, what I had felt. And it was clear to me now that they couldn't. No one could. But what could I do? What could I say? My mind was reeling, and my body felt like a stranger's. I wanted to scream, but I was afraid. Afraid that if I did, no one would believe me. Afraid that if I shared the truth that I had been somewhere beyond life and death, people would think I was crazy. And yet, something inside me knew this wasn't just a dream. It wasn't just some hallucination brought on by the anesthesia. No, this was real. It was as real as the beeping of the heart monitor beside me, as real as the sterile smell of the operating room. I had been to the other side. I had been there, and I had felt it. The peace. The light. The love. But how could I prove it? How could I explain to them that I had crossed a threshold, that I had been allowed to witness something beyond this world? How could I explain to them that I wasn't the same anymore? I was about to speak again when one of the doctors interrupted me. "You're going to be fine," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "You've made it through the surgery. You were touch and go there for a while, but you're stable now. We've got you." I nodded, though I wasn't really listening. I wasn't sure if I'd ever really be fine again. Not after what I had seen, not after what I had felt. But the question still lingered in my mind, what now? I had made it back, yes. But at what cost? And what did it all mean? One thing was certain. I was no longer the person I had been before the surgery. The experience had changed me, whether I was ready for it or not. The peace I had felt in the light was something I couldn't forget. It wasn't just something I had seen, it was something I had become. But how could I reconcile that with the world I had returned to? How could I go back to being the person I was before? I didn't know. But I knew I had to try. The days after I woke up were a blur. The hospital room became a haze of medications, sleep, and doctors coming in and out, checking my vitals, asking how I was feeling. They told me I was recovering well. Physically, they were right. My body was healing, the pain from the surgery fading with each passing day. But on the inside, I felt like something was deeply broken, or perhaps, more accurately, reborn. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was a stranger to myself, like I had been dropped into a world that no longer fit. The clothes, the sounds, the faces, everything felt wrong. Out of place. It was as if my mind had gone to another dimension, to another existence, and when I returned, it was like putting a puzzle piece into the wrong spot. For days, I stayed quiet. I didn't want to talk to anyone about what I had seen. How could I? Who would believe me? What could I possibly say to explain what had happened? I had crossed over to the other side, to that vast expanse of light and peace, and now I was expected to go back to my life as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Everything. I tried to explain it to myself, to reason it away. Perhaps it was a dream, a reaction to the anesthesia, or the result of some near-death state that the doctors had described as the brain's final firing. But every time I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than a trick of my mind, I felt the warmth of the light again. I felt the peace, the love, the sense of belonging that had filled me in that other world. How could I have imagined something so vivid? So real? How could I have come back from the edge of death unchanged, when I knew that what I had seen wasn't just a figment of my imagination? I tried to push it away, to bury the memories. But the more I tried, the more persistent they became. It wasn't just the light either. It wasn't just the peaceful sensation of floating. What haunted me most was the presence I had encountered. I didn't know who, or what, it was. It wasn't a person, not in the way we think of people. It was a knowing, a feeling. It was like a being of pure understanding, a presence that communicated not through words, but through a deep connection of the soul. You can stay, or you can go back. The words echoed in my mind every night as I tried to sleep. It was as if I was being asked, not just by the voice, but by the entire experience, what I wanted. What I really wanted. I'd been given a choice between staying in that world of peace and light or returning to the chaos of the life I had once known. I had chosen to return. I had chosen to come back for my family, for the people who needed me. But now, that decision felt more like a burden than a relief. What if I had made the wrong choice? What if the other side had been where I truly belonged? Every time I looked at my family, I saw their faces filled with relief that I was alive, that I had returned to them, and I wanted to be grateful. I was grateful. But there was something inside me, something deep and unshakable, that felt out of place. I had crossed over to a different reality, one where love, peace and understanding flowed freely. And now, here I was, back in the same world of bills, responsibilities, and daily struggles. What if I didn't belong here anymore? It was hard to talk to anyone about it. I couldn't even bring myself to tell my wife, Anna, about the experience. She was so relieved to have me back, and I couldn't bear the thought of burdening her with the truth, telling her that I had seen the other side and come back, but I wasn't sure I wanted to stay here. She had already gone through enough during the surgery, and the last thing I wanted was to add to her pain by admitting I felt disconnected from everything. But I felt that way more and more each day. Anna noticed, of course. She saw the change in me. At first, she chalked it up to the trauma of the surgery, the emotional toll of what had happened. But after a few weeks, she began to ask questions. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked one night, as we sat together on the couch, the soft hum of the TV in the background. She looked at me with concern, her eyes searching my face, trying to find the man she once knew. "You've been acting distant. Not yourself. Is it because of what happened? Are you still in pain?" I could see the worry in her eyes, but I didn't know how to explain it. How could I tell her that the man she married had been to the edge of death, had crossed over to something far beyond what either of us could comprehend, and had come back forever changed? I wanted to tell her. I wanted her to understand, but I didn't think she could. How could she? "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile that I hoped looked genuine. "Just a little shaken up, I guess. I'll be all right." But I wasn't fine. I wasn't sure what I was. A part of me still longed for the peace I had felt on the other side. It wasn't that I didn't love my family. It wasn't that I didn't want to be here for them. I did. But that light, that overwhelming sense of love and belonging, had changed something deep inside me. It was as though I was waking up to a truth I hadn't known before, a truth that I couldn't fully grasp yet. One thing I knew for sure, I wasn't the same person anymore. And the world around me wasn't the same either. That sense of peace, that light, kept calling to me, urging me to find a way to reconcile what I had seen with what I was living. It wasn't a loud voice, but a quiet whisper, a knowing that stayed with me, even as I tried to bury it. I couldn't deny it anymore. Something had shifted, something that I had to understand, or I would never be truly at peace again. The question was, how? How could I bridge the gap between the world I had seen and the life I was now living? How could I move forward with this new sense of awareness? Was there a way to bring that light, that peace, back into my daily life? And if so, how? I didn't know the answers yet, but I knew this much: the journey was far from over. Days blurred into weeks, and I struggled to find any sense of normalcy. I was back in my life, yes, but it felt as if something had irrevocably shifted inside me. The weight of the light, the pull of that other realm, never let go. I kept waking up at night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to remember the details of the experience. But every time I reached for it, it felt just out of reach, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. The worst part was the isolation. I couldn't talk to anyone about what had happened. It wasn't that I didn't want to, it was that I didn't know how. How could I explain something so otherworldly? How could I tell people that I had been to the edge of death and come back with a message that no one would understand? I had tried to bury it at first. Tried to shove it deep inside me, convinced that time would help. But it didn't. The light, the peace, the overwhelming sense of love and connection I had felt, it wouldn't leave me alone. And then it hit me: why was I trying to bury it? Why was I so afraid to acknowledge the truth of what had happened? What if I wasn't supposed to forget it? What if there was something I was meant to do with this experience, something I was meant to share? I couldn't keep running from it. I couldn't ignore the feeling deep inside me that there was a greater purpose to what I had gone through. I spent hours alone in the quiet, in the stillness, trying to process everything. Slowly, over time, it began to dawn on me: I wasn't meant to keep this experience to myself. I had been given a glimpse of something greater, something beyond our understanding of life and death. I had seen the light, felt the peace, and now I had a responsibility to share it. But the question remained, how? How do you explain to others something as intangible as peace? How do you convey a truth so profound, so personal, that it's almost impossible to express with mere words? I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew one thing: I had to start somewhere. I began by reaching out to others who had gone through similar experiences. I found online forums, support groups for people who had experienced near-death experiences, NDEs, and began reading their stories. At first, I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was amazed to find that I wasn't alone. There were so many others who had experienced the same light, the same peace, the same sense of connection with something greater than themselves. Some of them were still struggling to find their place in the world, just like I was. Others had found peace, a sense of purpose, in sharing their stories. There was something deeply comforting in knowing that others had walked this path before me. It didn't make the journey any easier, but it made it feel less lonely. The more I read, the more I felt a stirring inside me, a calling, perhaps. A need to share my own experience, to put words to something that was impossible to describe. I started small. I began writing. At first, it was just a journal, a way to get my thoughts out of my head. But soon, it became more. I started writing about the light, about the beings I had encountered, about the love and peace that had surrounded me. I wrote about the question I had been asked, the one that still haunted me. Are you ready to stay? Or do you wish to return? And then, I wrote about my choice. How I had chosen to return, to come back for my family, for my loved ones. But I also wrote about the pull I still felt, how, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the light kept calling to me. I wanted to stay. But I had to come back. And that's when I realized it: the message wasn't just for me. It wasn't just something I was meant to keep inside. I was meant to share this. I was meant to tell others that there was more than this life, that death wasn't the end. It was simply a transition, a doorway into something more profound, more beautiful than we could ever comprehend. The first time I shared my story was with a small group of NDE survivors I had met online. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would they think I was crazy? Would they dismiss me as just another person chasing a fantasy? But when I shared my experience, when I spoke about the light and the beings and the overwhelming love I had felt, there was no judgment. There was only understanding. "You're not alone," one of them said to me, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. "I've been there too. I felt that same peace. That same love. You're not crazy." I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. And that was when I realized, this was why I had come back. This was the reason I had been given a glimpse into the other side, to help others understand that there was more to life than what we could see, more than the physical world around us. The love and peace I had felt, those weren't just temporary feelings. They were a part of something eternal, something that could not be extinguished. There was life after death. And that was a message I needed to share. But it wasn't just about the afterlife. It was also about the message that came with it. The message I had heard, over and over again, in that realm of light. You can stay, or you can go back. The message wasn't just a question. It was a reminder that we have choices. Even in the most difficult times, even in the face of death, we still have the power to choose. That choice wasn't just about whether to live or die. It was about how we live. When we leave this world, we return to the light, to the love, to the peace. But we don't have to wait for death to experience it. We can choose to live in that peace, in that love, here and now. I began to share this realization with others. I began to speak about how we all have the ability to tap into that light, that love, that peace, without waiting for death. That we can live each day with a sense of purpose, of connection, of knowing that we are not alone. It wasn't easy. I still struggled with my own doubts, my own fears, but I kept pushing forward. I couldn't stay silent anymore. The message had been given to me for a reason. And if I was ever going to find peace, I knew I had to share it with the world. As I continued to write, speak, and share, something inside me shifted. The weight that had been hanging over me for so long began to lift. I no longer felt like an outsider in my own life. Slowly, but surely, I was learning to live with the knowledge that there was more to life than meets the eye. I had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at a deeper understanding of what it means to truly live. And with that, I found peace. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? In the weeks that followed, something strange began to happen. The more I spoke about my near-death experience, the more I felt like a foreigner in my own life. It wasn't just the strange disconnection I had felt when I first woke up, it was that the more I shared my story, the more I realized how different I had become. I had crossed over to the other side, witnessed something profound, and had returned with knowledge that felt both comforting and unnerving. I had expected the sense of peace I found on the other side to translate into an immediate sense of calm and clarity here, in this world. But it didn't. If anything, the peace I felt was at odds with the noise and chaos of the world I had returned to. It wasn't just the day-to-day stresses, work, bills, appointments, but the simple fact that most people couldn't fathom what I had experienced. The profound changes I had gone through seemed alien to those around me. Even Anna, the person I loved most, who had been there for me through everything, seemed distant, as though she couldn't fully understand what had happened. And to be honest, I couldn't blame her. How could anyone understand something so far beyond what we know as human beings? I found myself slipping into isolation more and more. I would sit in silence at the dinner table, my mind drifting off to the light, the peace, the love that I had felt. It wasn't that I didn't love Anna, or my children. I did. But when I was with them, I felt as though I was looking at the world through a foggy window, seeing it but not really being a part of it. I knew they loved me, but there was an emptiness inside that I couldn't fill with anything here, nothing in this world could compare to what I had experienced. At night, when I tried to sleep, I would replay the moments of my experience, the warmth of the light, the deep sense of calm, the voices, the question. Do you wish to stay, or do you want to return? I could never quite grasp why I had chosen to come back. It had felt like the right decision, of course. I had been given a chance to return to my family, to my life, but now, in the stillness of my thoughts, I wondered if I had chosen wrongly. I wondered if the peaceful place I had left behind was where I truly belonged. Maybe I had made the mistake of returning, thinking I had unfinished business, but in the process, I had left a part of me behind. I tried to focus on work, on daily tasks. But every conversation, every moment in the world of the living, felt increasingly disconnected. It was as though I was still carrying a foot in both worlds, the one I had returned to and the one I had briefly visited. The more I tried to engage with this world, the more it felt out of place, like an actor trying to play a role they didn't quite understand. One evening, after dinner, Anna and I sat together on the couch. I had tried to push aside the feeling of alienation, but it had been building for days. I could feel the distance between us, like an invisible wall. She noticed, of course, and she couldn't stay quiet anymore. "You're not okay, are you?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. "You keep retreating into yourself. You're here with us, but you're not really here." I sighed, rubbing my eyes. I wanted to tell her everything, to pour out my heart, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain what I had seen? How could I explain that I had crossed a threshold and seen things that were too profound, too sacred to put into words? How could I tell her that the person she married, the person she thought she understood, had changed in ways neither of us could ever fully comprehend? I don't know how to explain it, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. It's like I'm here, but I'm not. I keep thinking about the other side. I keep thinking about the light, about the peace I felt. Anna's eyes softened. She took my hand in hers, her grip warm and comforting. I don't understand it, she said, her voice quiet, but I believe you. I can see that something has changed. And I can see that it's eating you up inside. I was relieved, in a way, that she believed me, but the weight of the experience still hung between us. It wasn't that she didn't care, it was that she couldn't share the burden. She hadn't been with me on the other side. She hadn't seen the things I had seen, felt the things I had felt. How could she understand the depth of it? I feel like I'm caught between two worlds, I confessed, my voice trembling. One is here, with you, with our family, but the other is this peace, this love that I can't find anywhere in this life. Anna didn't speak for a long time. She just sat there, squeezing my hand, letting the silence stretch between us. I knew she didn't have any answers. I didn't expect her to. You're not the same, she finally said, her voice full of emotion. And I think you need to figure out what that means. But I don't want you to forget about us. I don't want you to forget about the life we've built together. I won't, I whispered. But even as I said it, I wondered if I could ever truly return to the life I had before. Could I ever be the person I had been, before the experience? Or was I destined to live forever in this strange limbo, torn between two worlds? Anna didn't ask me to make a decision that night. She knew that I was still processing everything, that the enormity of what had happened to me was something I needed to understand on my own. But her words stuck with me. You need to figure out what this means, she had said. And deep down, I knew she was right. I wasn't going to find peace by running away from what I had experienced. I wasn't going to find answers by pretending it didn't happen. The only way forward was to face it, to accept the truth of what I had seen, what I had felt, and to reconcile that with the life I had returned to. The question, then, was how? How do you bridge the divide between the world of peace and love you once knew, and the world of struggle and hardship you're living in now? It wasn't going to be easy. But I knew that somehow, I had to find a way to live in both worlds, to honor the lessons I had learned, while still embracing the life I had returned to. And so, I made a promise to myself that night. I would begin to seek out answers, not just for myself, but for those I loved. I wouldn't ignore the experience. I wouldn't bury it. Somewhere, somehow, I would find a way to bring the peace of the other side back into this life. It wasn't easy, this reconciliation of two worlds. Some days, the weight of the choice I had made, the choice to return, felt unbearable. I was living in a reality where bills had to be paid, people had to be taken care of, and every day presented its own set of challenges. Yet, there was this nagging sense that there was something more, something deeper waiting to be acknowledged. I started small. Each day, I made a conscious effort to hold on to the peace I had felt, the love I had experienced on the other side. I would take a few quiet moments in the morning, before the rush of the day began, to center myself. I would close my eyes, slow my breathing, and allow myself to feel that light again. It wasn't the same as the experience itself, of course. It couldn't be. But there was a connection, a thread that tied me to that moment, a whisper of the peace I had felt. At first, I did this alone. I didn't want to burden anyone with my journey. Anna, though she had been kind and patient with me, couldn't possibly understand what I was going through. No one could. And yet, something deep inside me told me that I had to share this newfound peace. That it wasn't meant to be kept to myself. One evening, as I sat on the back porch, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, I finally decided to talk about it. My fingers trembled as I picked up my phone, the familiar weight of it feeling strangely foreign in my hand. I had spent weeks searching for an outlet, for a way to express what I had felt, what I had seen. So, I reached out to an online support group I had found, a group for people who had gone through near-death experiences. It wasn't a big group, only a handful of people. But it was enough. These were people who, like me, had stood at the edge of death and returned, people who had witnessed the other side. People who understood. I hesitated for a long moment, unsure of how to begin. The words were so difficult to put together, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. But I knew I couldn't keep it in anymore. So, I began to type. Hi, my name is David. I've never really shared my story before, but I need to. I had a near-death experience during surgery, and it changed everything. I saw light, peace, love beyond anything I could describe. I felt connected to something greater, something beyond this world. But since coming back, it's like I don't fit here anymore. My life feels disconnected, and I don't know how to reconcile what I saw with what I'm living now. I stared at the screen for a long time after I hit send, as if waiting for some kind of miracle to happen. I didn't know what to expect, whether anyone would respond, whether they would think I was crazy. But as the minutes passed, responses began trickling in. I've been there too, David, one person wrote. I understand the disconnect. It's so hard to come back to this world after you've seen what's beyond. But you're not alone in this. We're all here for you. Same here. It's like we're supposed to be living in this world, but we're not really part of it anymore. I don't know if it's something you can ever get used to, but talking about it helps. A lot. The messages came in faster, each one filled with compassion, understanding, and shared experience. For the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. And, more importantly, I realized something important: my experience wasn't just about me. It wasn't just something I had gone through in isolation. It was a thread that connected me to something larger, something shared by countless others who had crossed over, felt the light, and returned. That was the moment everything started to shift. I knew then that my purpose wasn't just to live a life of survival, to simply get by. I had been given a gift, a glimpse into a greater reality, and I couldn't hide it anymore. The peace, the love, the deep connection I had felt on the other side wasn't meant to be kept in silence. It wasn't meant to stay hidden. That night, I went to bed with a renewed sense of clarity. I didn't have all the answers, and I knew I wouldn't have them for a long time. But I knew I had to start living differently. I had to begin living with intention, with purpose, not just for myself, but for others. If my experience could help even one person feel less alone, less afraid, then it was worth it. I woke up early the next morning, the first rays of sunlight creeping through the blinds. Instead of rushing to start the day, I took a moment to reflect on my intentions. What did I want my life to be like now? For so long, I had been driven by external factors: work, obligations, responsibilities. But now, with this newfound clarity, I wanted to live in alignment with the truth I had glimpsed on the other side. I wanted to embrace the peace and love that had become so real to me and find a way to share that with the world. And so, I began taking small steps toward living with greater awareness. I started talking openly about my experience, not just with strangers, but with Anna, with my friends, with anyone who would listen. I began to meditate more regularly, to center myself in that light, to hold on to the love I had felt. I realized that the key wasn't in what I had experienced, but in the feeling it left me with. The sense that we are all connected, that there is something far greater than the struggles of this world. As I did this, something unexpected began to happen. I started to feel more at peace. I started to feel more present in my life, even amidst the chaos. It wasn't perfection, but it was progress. And, just as importantly, I began to notice small moments of connection with the people around me. It was subtle at first: a shared smile with a stranger, a deeper conversation with Anna, a moment of understanding between friends. These were tiny moments, but they mattered. They reminded me that the light, the love, and the connection I had felt on the other side wasn't just for after death. It was here, now, in the little things, in the everyday moments of life. For the first time since I had returned, I began to feel like I was truly living again, not in fear, not in isolation, but in connection. And I knew then that my journey wasn't over. It had just begun. There was still much to discover, much to learn. But I was no longer searching for a way to fit in, to go back to the life I had before. I was learning to embrace the life I had now, with all of its imperfections, with all of its struggles, and with all of its moments of grace. I had crossed over. I had seen the light. And I was ready to live in it. As time passed, the deep sense of peace that had followed me from the other side began to sink deeper into my daily life. It wasn't instantaneous, nor was it perfect, but slowly, the lessons I had learned during my brief time in that ethereal realm began to shape the way I interacted with the world. I had always known, in some abstract sense, that life was about choices. But now, with the clarity I had gained, the weight of those choices felt heavier, more significant. I began to see the world in a new light, quite literally. The beauty of a sunset, the sound of birds chirping in the morning, the way the light filtered through the trees, these things had always been there, but I had been blind to them, too caught up in the noise of life to really notice. I now took the time to appreciate those small moments, understanding that each of them was a gift. More importantly, I began to realize something about the choices we make in life. The question I had been asked on the other side, do you wish to stay, or do you want to return? Had not been just a question about life or death. It had been a question about purpose. It was a question that went beyond my physical existence. It was about how I chose to live. I had returned, yes, but the return was not about simply existing. It was about choosing to live with intention, to live with purpose. Each day, I had a choice. I could choose to live in fear, in survival mode, in autopilot. Or I could choose to live in the light I had felt, in the peace that transcended everything I knew. And so, I began to make that choice every day. It wasn't always easy, of course. There were moments when the weight of life would press down on me, the stress of work, the pressures of being a good husband, a good father. There were times when I would slip into old habits of rushing through life, of focusing on everything except what really mattered. But every time I found myself slipping, I would stop, breathe, and remind myself of the choice I had made, to live with purpose, to live with awareness. One day, after a particularly stressful week, I found myself sitting at my desk at work, staring at a pile of paperwork. My mind was spinning with all the tasks I had yet to complete, and I felt the familiar sense of overwhelm creeping in. I took a deep breath and paused, closing my eyes for a moment. I remembered the peace, the light, the love. It wasn't just something I had felt in a fleeting moment, it was something that could be carried into every aspect of my life. I made a decision right then and there. Instead of diving into the pile of work, I would take a moment for myself. I stood up from my desk, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. The sky was a pale blue, and the sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon. For the first time in weeks, I felt my body relax. I wasn't in a rush. I didn't need to keep going in circles. I could simply be, in this moment, in this breath. That was when I realized that the power of choice wasn't just about big, life-altering decisions. It was about the small, everyday moments. The choice to slow down, to appreciate the present, to choose peace over stress. It was about choosing love over fear, connection over isolation. The next morning, as I sat at the kitchen table with Anna, I shared this revelation with her. We had both been going through a rough patch. The stress of life had been wearing us both down, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Anna, I said softly, I've been thinking a lot about something. About the choice we make every day. She looked at me, raising an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. What do you mean? The choice we make in how we live. We don't just choose how to react to things, we choose how to see the world. And lately, I've been choosing peace. I've been choosing to live in the light, to be aware of the beauty around me, even when everything else feels chaotic. She took a deep breath, as though processing my words. I know what you mean. I've been so focused on getting through the day that I haven't taken the time to really see things. To see you. To see us. I reached for her hand across the table, squeezing it gently. We don't have to wait for a big moment, Anna. Every day is a chance to choose. To choose love. To choose connection. To choose peace. Anna smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. I want that too. I want to remember what really matters. And in that moment, something shifted between us. It wasn't a magical solution to all our problems, but it was the beginning of something new. We didn't need to have all the answers. We didn't need to know what the future held. But we knew that we could choose how to live in the present. Later that evening, as I sat with my children, watching them play and laugh, I realized just how much I had taken for granted before. I had been so focused on what I hadn't achieved, what I hadn't done, that I had overlooked the simple joy of being with the people I loved. The time I had with them was precious, and I wasn't going to waste it by dwelling on what could have been. I watched as my son raced around the yard, his laughter filling the air. He was so full of life, so full of joy. In that moment, I knew I wanted to live like that, fully present, fully alive, embracing the small moments that made life beautiful. Over the next few weeks, I began to feel a subtle shift in the way I approached life. The choices I made, big and small, started to align with the peace I had found. When I felt stress rising, I would stop and breathe. When I felt fear creeping in, I would remind myself of the love and connection I had experienced on the other side. I didn't always get it right, but the awareness of choice began to empower me. And then, something extraordinary happened. I began to notice the same shift in the people around me. Anna and I started having deeper conversations, ones that were not just about the logistics of daily life, but about our dreams, our fears, and our hopes. My children, too, seemed to respond to the new energy I was bringing into our home. There was more laughter, more joy, and more connection. I wasn't alone in this transformation. It felt like the world around me was starting to mirror the changes I was making inside. The power of choice, I realized, wasn't just a personal experience. It was contagious. By choosing peace, by choosing love and awareness, I was changing not only my own life but also the lives of those around me. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly alive. I wasn't waiting for a moment. I wasn't waiting for death or for some grand realization to change my life. I was living, fully and completely, in the moment. And that, I knew, was what I had been given a second chance for. To live, not just to survive, but to thrive, with every choice I made. And that, I realized, was the most powerful gift of all. As much as I had embraced this new sense of purpose, there were still days when the doubt would creep in. It wasn't a loud, overwhelming voice, but a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. The old me, the person who lived in the mundane details of life, the person who feared the unknown, would sometimes resurface. On those days, the peace I had so carefully nurtured felt distant, as though it were something I could almost touch, but just out of reach. It was a confusing time. Here I was, standing in the light of everything I had learned, everything I had experienced, yet I felt myself slipping back into the shadows. I would wake up with an uneasiness in my chest, a nagging feeling that maybe I was chasing something that wasn't real. Was the peace I had felt really something I could live with every day? Or had I merely been escaping the reality of what life truly was? These doubts were especially strong during moments of stress. One afternoon, as I walked into the kitchen, I could hear Anna and the kids talking, laughing. It was a sound that used to fill me with warmth, but lately, it just made me feel like I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't quite grasp. I felt out of place in my own home, as though I were observing my life from a distance rather than living in it. Anna noticed. She always did. "You okay?" she asked, setting down the cup of coffee she had been holding. Her voice was soft, concerned. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. But she could tell. "David, I've seen that look before," she said, walking over to me. "Something's off. You don't have to pretend with me. What's going on?" I exhaled, the weight of the doubt pressing down on me. It's just, some days, I wonder if I'm really changing, or if I'm just pretending. I mean, I've been trying to live with this new purpose, but it's not easy. It's like there's this part of me, the old me, that's still here, and it doesn't fit anymore. I'm not sure how to make peace with that. Anna looked at me, and for a long moment, she didn't say anything. She simply reached out and placed a hand on my arm, her touch warm and reassuring. David, what you've been through is unimaginable. What you've learned, what you've experienced, it's a huge shift. It's not going to happen overnight. There are going to be days when you question it all. And that's okay. I stared at her, feeling the tears welling up in my eyes. I just don't want to go back to who I was. I don't want to lose this sense of peace. But I'm scared it's not real. That I'm not real. Anna shook her head. You're real. You've always been real, David. You've just gone through something that's hard for anyone to understand. But it doesn't mean you have to have all the answers right now. You're not going to have every moment figured out. But that's part of it, too, learning how to live with uncertainty, how to let the peace you found guide you even through the doubt. Her words were simple, but they struck something deep inside me. It wasn't about having everything figured out. It wasn't about being perfect or completely free from doubt. It was about accepting that the struggle was part of the journey. That peace didn't mean the absence of fear or doubt, but the ability to sit with them and still choose love, still choose connection. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. I hadn't expected Anna to have all the answers, but just hearing her validate what I was feeling made it all seem less daunting. We didn't need to fix everything right now. We just needed to be present, to move forward together. Over the next few days, I tried to be kinder to myself. I let go of the need to have it all figured out. Instead, I focused on the small steps I could take every day to reconnect with the peace I had found. I began to meditate again, taking time in the mornings to center myself. I focused on my breathing, letting the calmness of the moment fill me. I also reached out to the support group I had connected with after my near-death experience. Their words, too, helped me find perspective. So many of them spoke about the ongoing struggle, the moments of doubt, the questions, the fears. But they also spoke about the beauty of embracing that struggle, about allowing it to be part of the healing process. They reminded me that the journey didn't have an endpoint, it was ongoing, always evolving. As I read their messages, I felt a sense of camaraderie. These people had walked a similar path, and even though I couldn't see them face to face, I didn't feel so alone anymore. We were all in this together, learning, growing, questioning, and yes, struggling. But in the end, it wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. It was about showing up for the journey, even when it was hard. One night, as I lay in bed next to Anna, I turned to her and whispered, "I've been thinking about what you said earlier. About how I don't have to have all the answers." She smiled softly, her eyes still heavy with sleep. "I meant it. You don't have to have it all figured out. You're not alone in this." I took a deep breath and let the words sink in. For the first time in a while, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was okay to have moments of doubt. It was okay to question everything. I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to keep moving forward, choosing love and peace, even in the uncertainty. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of resolve. I was still on this journey. The road ahead wasn't clear, and the doubts would still come, but I knew now that it wasn't about avoiding those moments. It was about choosing how I responded to them. I didn't have to be free from fear or doubt to live in peace. I just had to embrace both, the peace and the doubt. And keep moving forward, one step at a time. And so, I chose. I chose to live with intention. I chose to embrace the struggle and the uncertainty. I chose to trust the journey, even when I didn't know where it was taking me. Because in the end, it wasn't the destination that mattered. It was the path, the choice to live, to love, and to grow. And that, I realized, was enough. I had made my peace with the journey. I had come to terms with the doubt that would inevitably arise, and I had learned to accept the messy, imperfect nature of my transformation. But there was one more step to take, one more realization that had yet to fully sink in. It was one thing to live in peace, to feel the light, but it was another thing entirely to share it with others. Up until this point, I had kept much of my experience to myself. My conversations with Anna, the support group I had found online, these were my outlets. But I hadn't truly opened up to anyone outside of these circles. And as much as I had found peace, I knew deep down that my journey wasn't just for me. It was meant to be shared. One evening, as I sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the horizon, a thought struck me, one that had been slowly brewing in my mind for weeks. I had to share my story. Not just with Anna, not just with those who already understood, but with the world. The idea terrified me. What would people think? What if they didn't believe me? What if they thought I was crazy, or worse, that I was somehow deluded? But then I remembered the faces of those in the support group. They had shared their stories with me, and I had felt their truth in the depth of their words. I realized then that my story, my experience, wasn't just about me. It was about showing others that there was something more. It was about giving hope to those who had lost it, giving comfort to those who feared death, and showing that peace was not a distant, unattainable dream. It was here. It was now. I stood up from the chair and walked inside. Anna was in the kitchen, making dinner. She looked up as I entered. "Hey, what's up?" "I think it's time," I said, my voice shaking slightly with nervous energy. She furrowed her brow. "Time for what?" "To share my story. To let others know what I've experienced." She set the knife down and walked over to me. "David, are you sure? This isn't something you have to do for anyone else. You don't need to explain yourself. You've already done so much work to heal. You don't owe anyone anything." "I know. But it's not about owing anyone anything. It's about not hiding anymore. I've been hiding, Anna. Hiding behind the fear of what people might think. Hiding behind the idea that my experience isn't valid, that it doesn't matter. But it does matter. It's changed me, and if it can help someone else, I have to share it. I can't keep it to myself anymore." Anna studied me for a moment, and I saw the hesitation in her eyes. She wasn't worried about me, it was more about the vulnerability of putting myself out there, about the risk of exposing something so deeply personal. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" she asked, her voice quiet but full of care. I took a deep breath. I don't know if I'm ever going to be ready. But I'm not going to wait for the perfect moment. This is my story, and it's worth telling. Anna placed a hand on my arm, her gaze softening. "Then I'll support you. I'm proud of you, David. No matter what happens." With her blessing, I made the decision. I was going to share my experience. But where would I begin? Who would I speak to? How would I get the message across? I knew that it couldn't be a rushed decision. It had to be done thoughtfully, in a way that felt true to my experience. So, I began by writing it all down. Every moment, every sensation, every word I had heard on the other side, every fear and joy I had felt. I wrote in detail, from the cold sterility of the operating room to the soft, warm light that had enveloped me. I wrote about the peace I had felt, the overwhelming love, and the clarity that came with that brief glimpse beyond death. It was a cathartic process. Writing it down, seeing the words take shape on the page, helped me realize just how far I had come. It helped me see how much I had changed, how much I had healed. But I also knew that writing it down wasn't enough. I wanted to connect with people on a deeper level, to reach their hearts, not just their minds. And that meant speaking out loud, telling my story face to face, with authenticity and vulnerability. I decided to begin by sharing it in the same support group I had been a part of. The people there had already experienced their own near-death moments, so they would understand the language of the soul in a way that others might not. It was the perfect starting point. And as I shared my story with them, I realized something powerful. It wasn't just my words that were reaching them. It was the energy behind them, the truth I had found in my experience. After I finished speaking, there was a long silence, and then one by one, members of the group began to respond. "I've been there," one woman said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know how to talk about it either, but hearing you, David, makes me feel like I'm not crazy. I felt the light, too. I felt the love." Another man nodded. "I didn't think anyone would understand what I went through, but hearing your story, I feel less alone." The responses flooded in, each one validating the experience I had lived, each one reminding me of the ripple effect we could create by sharing our stories. It was a small step, but it was a start. And it was enough. Over the next few weeks, I began sharing my story more publicly. I wrote blog posts, recorded videos, and even gave a talk at a local support center for those going through near-death experiences. Every time I spoke, I felt the warmth of connection, a reminder that we were all in this together, all searching for the same peace, the same understanding. And as I shared, something extraordinary began to happen. The fear I had once felt about being judged, about being misunderstood, began to dissipate. People weren't seeing me as a freak or a deluded man. They were seeing me as someone who had faced the ultimate question, life and death, and had returned with a message of love, peace, and hope. They saw me as human, not as someone with an abnormal experience, but as someone who had simply been blessed with a glimpse into something greater. The more I shared, the more I realized that the peace I had found was not meant to be hoarded. It was meant to be spread. To others who needed it, to those who were searching for answers, for hope, for reassurance. I had thought my near-death experience was a personal journey. But now, I understood. It wasn't just for me. It was for all of us. And as I continued to share my story, I saw that my journey wasn't just mine alone. It was the collective experience of so many others, and in telling it, I was helping to build a bridge between us all. The last few months had felt like a whirlwind, a deep dive into the unknown and back again. But now, as I sat quietly in the living room, watching the soft light of a new morning creep through the curtains, I realized that everything had changed. It wasn't just my story that had transformed. It was my entire life. The person I was before that surgery, the one who had feared death, who had lived for the wrong reasons, who had been trapped in the cycle of more, that person felt like a stranger to me now. It was as though I had shed an old skin, a skin that had protected me but ultimately confined me. The light I had seen on the other side was no longer just an experience I had lived through. It had become a part of me. A guiding force. A compass that now shaped every decision I made, every interaction, every thought. But as much as I had changed, there was still one lingering question. Was it all real? Was the peace, the love, the clarity of that moment something I had fabricated in my mind under the stress of a life-threatening situation? Or was it something deeper, something beyond human comprehension, something truly divine? In the early days after my recovery, I would lie awake at night, wrestling with that question. Sometimes, doubt would creep in, and I would wonder if the experience was merely a figment of my imagination. But every time I returned to the memory of that light, the warmth, the overwhelming sense of love, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that it was real. It wasn't something I could explain, but it was something I felt in every fiber of my being. And that was enough. I didn't need to have all the answers. The only answer I needed was that peace, that light, that love. I had experienced something profound, something that had shaped me in a way that no earthly explanation could fully capture. And that was enough. Over time, I came to understand that the most important truth I had learned wasn't about life after death. It was about life before death. We spend so much of our lives fearing the inevitable, avoiding the subject of death as if ignoring it will somehow delay its arrival. But what I had come to realize was that death was not the enemy. It was not something to fear. In fact, it was the very thing that made life precious. Life, in all its imperfection, its beauty, and its fleeting nature, was the gift. The other side, the light, the peace, it had shown me something so simple, yet so profound. This moment, right now, is all we truly have. We could spend our entire lives chasing after success, fame, wealth, and yet, at the end of it all, those things don't matter. What matters is how we love, how we live, how we embrace each moment we are given. I had spent so many years waiting for something, some grand achievement, some validation, some future moment when everything would finally make sense. But now, I understood that the beauty of life wasn't in waiting for something to happen. It was in embracing the now. In being present with the people I loved, in appreciating the small moments that made up the fabric of my days. It was a message I couldn't keep to myself. So, I continued to share my story. Not for fame or recognition, but to offer a little piece of the peace I had found. The more I spoke, the more I heard from others who had gone through their own near-death experiences, or who had faced their own struggles with mortality. People came to me with their questions, their doubts, their fears. And every time I shared my experience, I saw the same thing happening over and over again. People's faces would soften, their eyes would fill with understanding, and for a brief moment, they, too, would feel that peace. They would know, in their hearts, that life was about love. It was about connection. It was about living fully, even in the face of death. I spent more time with my family, with Anna and the kids, and I cherished every moment. The dinner table was no longer a place of tension and rushing to get through the meal. It became a time of connection, of laughter, of sharing. I wasn't in a hurry anymore. I didn't need to be. I knew that every moment with them was precious. And as for Anna, she and I grew even closer. Our bond, once marked by the ordinary struggles of life, had deepened into something more profound. We talked openly about our fears, our dreams, and our love for each other. We no longer took each other for granted. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the stars appear in the sky, Anna turned to me and asked, "Do you ever wonder, David, why you came back?" I smiled, a sense of calm washing over me. I think about it a lot, actually. And I've realized that maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe I was given a second chance to show others that peace is possible. That love is the answer. That life, no matter how uncertain, is worth living fully. She squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm so glad you came back. I'm so glad we have this life together." "I am, too," I said, my voice filled with emotion. "And I'm not going to waste it. I'm not going to waste another minute. Not when I know how precious it all is." In the years that followed, I continued to live with intention. I spoke with those who sought answers, I shared my story with anyone who would listen, and I made sure to live each day as if it were my last. Because, in a sense, I had already faced death. And it had changed me. I had once feared it, but now, I knew that death was not the end. It was a transition. And while we could never fully know what lay beyond, we could make the most of what we had in this moment. As I reflected on my journey, I understood that the peace I had felt on the other side wasn't something I had to wait for. It was something I could create in my own life, every single day. And it wasn't just about me. It was about everyone I encountered, their lives, their struggles, their fears, their hopes. And so, as I looked out at the life I had rebuilt, I knew that it was a life well lived. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had learned how to embrace the questions. How to live with uncertainty, to love without hesitation, and to make peace with the fact that none of us know what comes next. But we do know this: we are here. And that, I believe, is enough. I had died, and I had returned. And in doing so, I had discovered the ultimate truth: life, in all its fleeting moments, is the greatest gift we will ever receive. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?